My name is Claire Bennett, and for 10 years my family told a story about me. It wasn't a story I recognized, but it was the one they repeated at every holiday dinner, every phone call, every time someone new asked what my sister's family did for a living. Claire, oh, she used to be so promising, she threw it all away. I want you to sit with that phrase for a moment because it's going to come up again and again in this story. Threw it all away. As if a life could only have one shape. As if walking away from a corner office meant walking away from a life worth living. Here is what actually happened. 15 years ago, I graduated top of my class from a law program that my mother still brings up at every family gathering like a trophy she's allowed to hold, even though it was never hers. I was recruited by one of the largest corporate firms in Chicago. I had a starting salary that made my father, a man who rarely complimented anyone, finally say the words, "Now that's a real career." For 5 years, I was the golden child. I billed more hours than anyone in my class. I made partner track by year 4. My sister Rachel, 2 years younger, was still finding her footing, bouncing between marketing jobs, always one step behind, always compared to me at Thanksgiving, in a way that made both of us miserable, though neither of us said so out loud. Then my husband Daniel got sick. It started small fatigue he blamed on our new baby, a cough that wouldn't quit. By the time the diagnosis came, it was already a fight for his life, not just his health. Multiple myeloma. Aggressive. The kind of illness that doesn't wait for you to finish your billable hours. I remember sitting in the hospital parking garage with my phone in my hand, trying to figure out how to explain to a managing partner that I needed to step back, not for a few weeks, but indefinitely. I remember the silence on the other end of the line. I remember being told gently but unmistakably that the track I was on didn't pause. It either continued or it ended. I chose Daniel. I chose our son Michael, who was 2 years old and didn't understand why Daddy slept so much or why Mommy cried in the car before she came inside with a smile stapled onto her face. I left the firm. Not with a plan, not with a backup career. I left because there was no version of staying that let me be the person I needed to be for the 2 people who needed me most. My mother, Diane, did not take this well. "You're giving up everything you worked for," she said, standing in my kitchen while Daniel slept upstairs. For what, to play nurse? I didn't have the energy to explain that playing nurse meant learning how to manage a central line, how to track blood counts, how to hold a grown man's hand while he vomited from chemotherapy and still tell him he was going to be fine, even on the days I didn't believe it myself. Rachel, for her part, said less, but I saw the shift in how she looked at me. The pity. The quiet, unspoken relief that she was no longer the daughter who was falling behind. Somewhere in that year, without either of us saying a word, the family hierarchy flipped, and Rachel liked her new position at the top. Daniel fought for 3 years. He lost that fight 2 months before Michael's 5th birthday. I want to tell you that my family rallied around me after that. They didn't, not really. There were casseroles for 2 weeks and then silence. My mother's refrain didn't soften with grief, if anything, it hardened. "You could have kept your job and hired help," she told me once at the funeral reception of all places. Lots of people manage. I didn't manage. I survived. And when I came out the other side, I didn't go back to law. I couldn't. Not because I wasn't capable, but because something in me had changed permanently, and corporate litigation no longer had any pull on the person I'd become. Instead, I did something my family considered even more baffling. I started consulting quietly from my kitchen table for small companies trying to survive their own crises, restructuring turnarounds, businesses on the edge of collapse. I understood something about surviving collapse that most consultants never had to learn firsthand. Within 2 years, that consulting practice had a name, a small office, and 3 employees. Within 5, it had become something else entirely, something I'll get to. But to my family, none of that mattered. To my family, I was still the daughter who threw away a 6-figure legal career to raise a kid alone in a modest house 40 minutes outside the city. Rachel, meanwhile, had climbed steadily at a mid-sized marketing firm, made regional director, and was, according to my mother, living the life Claire could have had. I stopped correcting them. It was easier to let them believe what they needed to believe. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being misunderstood by the people who are supposed to know you best. Friends from law school would occasionally reach out curious what had become of me, and I could hear the surprise in their voices when I mentioned Meridian's client roster, the size of our Denver office, the fact that we'd been profiled briefly quietly in a regional business journal the year before. They didn't need convincing. They'd simply lost track of me the way people do, and were pleasantly surprised to catch up. My family was different. My family had a story they needed to be true, and no amount of evidence seemed capable of dislodging it. I used to think that was about me, that I'd failed to explain myself clearly enough that if I just found the right words, the right moment, they'd finally understand what I'd built. Over time, I came to understand it wasn't about clarity at all. It was about what my success would have cost them emotionally if they'd let themselves see it. As long as I was the daughter who'd thrown her life away, Rachel got to be the one who'd made it. As long as I was between things, my mother got to have exactly one success story instead of two complicated ones. It was never really about me. I just happened to be the character they needed for their story to make sense. Which brings us to the party. The email came from Rachel, not my mother, which should have told me something right away. Claire, hope you're well. We're celebrating my promotion to VP of Marketing at Halstead Cole Partners this Saturday at the Wharton Room downtown. Would love for you to come if you're not too busy. No pressure either way. If you're not too busy. No pressure either way. Rachel had a gift for wrapping condescension in politeness so tightly you almost missed it. I hadn't seen most of my extended family in nearly 2 years. Michael was 12 now, taller than me, more interested in video games than family gatherings, which suited me fine most weekends. But something about this invitation, sent almost as an afterthought, a box to check, irritated me in a way I couldn't quite name. I called my friend Pam, who has known me since law school, and has never once let me get away with lying to myself. "You don't have to go," she said. "I know I don't have to. But you're going to." "I think I am." "Why?" I didn't have a clean answer for her. Part of it was Michael. He adored his Aunt Rachel, in the uncomplicated way kids adore relatives who show up occasionally and buy expensive gifts. Part of it was my mother, who had called twice that week to make sure I understood how important this was for Rachel. As if I might not grasp the concept of a promotion. As if success were a language I'd forgotten how to speak. And part of it, the part I didn't say out loud to Pam, was that I was curious what it would feel like to walk into that room. Not to prove anything. I want to be honest about that. This wasn't a revenge fantasy taking shape in my head. I genuinely didn't know yet that there was anything to reveal. I just wanted to see my family in their natural habitat one more time, the way you might visit a place you used to live just to see if it still fits. My mother called again 2 days before the party. "Wear something nice," she said. "Rachel's coworkers will be there. Her boss is coming. This is a big deal for her." "I know how to dress myself, Mom." "I just mean it's not like your old work events. It's a professional crowd." There it was again. The quiet implication that whatever life I'd built since Daniel died wasn't professional. That the woman who now ran a firm with 40 employees across 2 states was somehow less polished than the version of me who used to wear a firm-issued lanyard. I didn't correct her. I never corrected any of them, not in 10 years. It had simply stopped feeling worth the energy arguing with people who'd already decided who you were. I picked out a charcoal dress I'd worn to a client dinner the month before, the kind of understated, expensive simplicity that people who know quality recognize instantly and people who don't overlook completely. I told Michael I'd be back by 9. I told myself this was just an obligation, an evening to get through. I had no idea it would be the evening everything unraveled, not for me, but for the story my family had spent a decade telling about who I was. The Wharton Room was on the 32nd floor of a building I used to walk past on my way to depositions back when depositions were my life. Floor-to-ceiling windows, string lights, a jazz trio in the corner playing something soft and forgettable. 40 or 50 well-dressed people mingling with champagne flutes, the particular energy of a corporate crowd trying to look casual while being anything but. I spotted my mother first. She was near the entrance holding court with 2 women I didn't recognize, wearing the deep blue dress she reserves for events she considers important. When she saw me, her smile flickered. Not warmth exactly, more like recalibration, the look of someone quickly adjusting an expectation. "Claire, you made it." She said it the way you'd say it to a caterer who arrived on time despite doubts. I said I would. "Well." She glanced past me, scanning the room, already looking for someone more interesting to talk to. "Rachel's around here somewhere. Go find her. And Claire." She caught my arm as I turned. "Try to mingle a little. Some of Rachel's colleagues are quite accomplished. It wouldn't hurt to make a good impression. I want you to understand something about my mother. She wasn't cruel in dramatic movie villain ways. She was cruel in the quiet, accumulated way that some parents are 1,000 small comments over a decade that add up to a verdict you're never allowed to appeal. I found Rachel near the bar glowing in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. She was in her element, new title, new confidence, a small crowd of coworkers laughing at something she'd just said. When she saw me, she waved me over with the particular warmth people reserve for family members they want to display, not necessarily talk to. "Claire, you came." "Everyone, this is my sister." A beat. "She's between things right now, but she used to be a big-time lawyer downtown." Between things. 10 years of raising a child alone, building a company from nothing, and Rachel had compressed all of it into 2 words that made me sound unemployed. I let it go. I'd let go of worse. "Congratulations on the promotion." I said, and I meant it. Whatever else was true about my sister, she'd worked for this, and I didn't begrudge her the climb. VP of Marketing. She said like the words themselves were a small trophy she could hand around the circle. "Took 11 years, but I got here." "That's great, Rachel, really." My mother appeared at my elbow, then wine glass in hand, and said the sentence that I suspect she'd been waiting all evening to say, maybe all week. "You know," she said to no one in particular, though it landed on everyone nearby. "It's such a relief. At least one of my daughters made something of herself." The circle went quiet for half a second, that particular half second where strangers realize they've witnessed a family moment they weren't supposed to see. Rachel didn't correct her. Rachel, in fact, looked almost pleased the way you look pleased when a compliment lands even at someone else's expense. I felt the old familiar heat rise in my chest, not rage exactly. Something more tired than rage. A decade-old wound being pressed on again gently, casually in public. "I should get a drink," I said, and stepped away before my face could betray anything. I found a quiet corner near the windows and nursed a glass of wine I didn't particularly want watching the party. The way you watch a play you've already seen, knowing the lines before they're spoken. It didn't take long for Rachel to find her audience again. This time, a slightly larger one anchored by a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and the unmistakable bearing of someone used to being listened to. I'd learn later this was Gregory Whitfield, CEO of Halstead Coal Partners, Rachel's boss, and the guest of honor she'd been most eager to impress all night. "So, my sister," Rachel was saying, gesturing toward me with her glass, not quite realizing or not quite caring that I was close enough to hear every word. "Used to be this hotshot corporate attorney. Big firm downtown, tons of money, the whole thing." "What happened?" one of the coworkers asked. "Life happened," Rachel said with a small laugh that had an edge to it I recognized instantly. "Her husband got sick, she quit to take care of him, and then, well..." She shrugged in a way that somehow managed to convey both sympathy and judgment in the same gesture. "She's been doing some kind of small consulting things since. It's very sweet, honestly. Not everyone can handle a real career, and that's okay. Someone's got to be home for the school pickup, right?" There was a ripple of polite, uncomfortable laughter, the kind people offer when they're not sure if a joke was actually a joke. "I just think it's important," Rachel continued, warming to her theme, now clearly enjoying the contrast she was drawing between her rising trajectory and my supposed decline, to actually want the pressure. The travel, the hours, the stakes. Some people want that life, and some people... She glanced toward me, not bothering to lower her voice much further. "Want something simpler. Which is fine, genuinely. Not everyone is built for the real world." Gregory Whitfield, to his credit, looked slightly uncomfortable. The look of a boss watching an employee say something at a work event that he'd rather not have overheard. But he didn't say anything. Why would he? He had no reason to doubt a word of it. I thought about walking away. I thought about laughing it off the way I always had, letting the comment dissolve into the noise of the party the way I'd let 100 comments dissolve over the past decade. But something in me, maybe it was grief for Daniel finally settling into something steadier, maybe it was 12 years of watching my son grow up fatherless while people who'd never once shown up for either of us decided what my life was worth. Something in me had simply run out of room to keep shrinking. I walked back into the circle. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I do want to correct one thing." Rachel's smile faltered slightly. "Claire, I didn't mean..." "I know what you meant," I said, not unkindly, just plainly. "But I think you should know what I actually do, since you've just told a room full of your colleagues that I couldn't handle a real career." The circle had gone quiet in that particular way crowds do when they sense something is about to happen. "I run a firm called Meridian Turnaround Partners," I said. We specialize in restructuring companies that are on the edge of collapse. Usually family businesses, mid-size firms, companies that banks have already written off. We've got offices in Chicago and Denver, 41 employees, and last year we managed just under $200 million in client assets under advisement. I let that sit for a second before continuing. I didn't leave law because I couldn't handle pressure, Rachel. I left because my husband was dying and our son needed a parent who showed up. And then I built something from a kitchen table because that's what I know how to do, find the thing that's falling apart and figure out how to save it. Nobody spoke. Rachel's face had gone through 3 or 4 expressions in the space of a few seconds. None of them comfortable. And that's when Gregory Whitfield, who had been quiet up to this point, sipping his drink, watching this family drama unfold with the polite discomfort of an outsider, set his glass down very slowly on the nearest table. "Wait," Gregory said, and something in his tone had shifted entirely, the casual, half-listening posture of a boss at a party evaporating into something much sharper. "Meridian Turnaround Partners. You're that Claire Bennett." I turned to him, genuinely unsure what he meant. "I'm sorry, have we met?" "No," he said slowly, "but 3 months ago our board approved an emergency restructuring advisory contract with a firm called Meridian after Halstead Coal's Denver division came within about 6 weeks of defaulting on a credit line that would have taken the whole company down with it. I wasn't in the room for the vendor selection that was handled at the board level above my day-to-day. I just knew we hired a firm out of Chicago that saved us from a catastrophe nobody outside the executive team was ever told about." He was staring at me now with the particular expression of a man doing rapid math in his head. "The senior partner who ran point on that engagement," he said, "the one whose restructuring plan the board still talks about, was named C. Bennett." I assumed C stood for Charles or Christopher. I never once... He stopped, shook his head slightly. I never once thought to ask. The color had drained from Rachel's face in a way I will genuinely never forget for the rest of my life. "Claire," Gregory said, "are you telling me that you're the same Claire Bennett who restructured our Denver division's debt 6 months ago? The plan that kept 400 jobs from disappearing?" "That would be me, yes," I said as evenly as I could manage, though my heart was pounding harder than it had in years. Gregory looked at Rachel, then back at me, then at Rachel again. "Wait," he said, his voice dropping into something closer to disbelief than anger, though there was an edge of something else there too. Something I suspect Rachel would be thinking about for a long time. "You're her sister." Rachel opened her mouth. Nothing came out for a long moment. "Yes," she finally managed. Yes, my sister." "The one you were just describing," Gregory said, and I want to be clear, his voice wasn't loud, wasn't a scene. It was worse than that in a way because it was quiet and precise, the voice of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about an employee he'd just promoted as someone who couldn't handle a real career. Nobody in that circle was laughing anymore. I didn't know the details of what she..." Rachel stammered, and for the first time in a decade I watched my sister search for words and come up empty. "The details," Gregory repeated, and I could hear him choosing his next words with visible care, the way executives do when they know a comment might resurface later in a very different context. "Rachel, the plan your sister's firm designed is the reason your division still exists. It's the reason there was a marketing department left for you to be promoted, watch, within. I hadn't meant for it to happen this way. I want to be honest about that. I hadn't walked into that party planning to expose anything, hadn't even fully registered until that exact moment that Meridian's Halstead Coal engagement and my sister's employer were one and the same company. Chicago has no shortage of mid-size firms in trouble. I hadn't connected the dots because I'd never had reason to. I signed engagement letters with holding company names, not with the subsidiary brands employees like Rachel worked under day to day. But there it was. 10 years of at least one daughter made something of herself, collapsing quietly in a room full of champagne flutes and string lights because it turned out the daughter everyone had written off was the reason the other daughter still had a job to be promoted into. My mother, who had been standing close enough to hear all of this, had gone very, very quiet. I watched her face during those few seconds, and I want to tell you honestly what I saw because it wasn't triumph on my part and it wasn't simple shame on hers. It was something more complicated than either. It was a woman realizing in real time in front of strangers that the story she'd told herself for 10 years had a hole in it large enough to swallow the whole narrative whole. I don't think my mother is a cruel person, not fundamentally. I think she's a person who found it easier to sort her daughters into categories. The one who made it and the one who didn't, because the alternative that both of us might be navigating our own complicated, valid lives in different shapes required a kind of nuance she'd never quite practiced. Watching that certainty crack in front of her was not something I enjoyed, but I won't pretend it didn't feel like something long overdue either. Rachel's coworkers, to their credit, seemed to sense that this was no longer a moment for them, and the circle dissolved within a minute or two, people drifting toward the bar, or the windows with the practiced tact of professionals who know when a family conversation has stopped being party conversation. Gregory Whitfield lingered a moment longer, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Professional curiosity, maybe, or the particular respect people show once they realize they've been underestimating someone in the room. "I owe you a proper conversation," he said quietly before he stepped away to make his call. "Not tonight, but soon." I nodded, though my mind was still catching up to what had just happened. I wish I could tell you there was a triumphant round of applause, that the whole room turned to look at me with newfound respect, that some cosmic scale of justice balanced itself out in that instant. Real life rarely gives you the clean satisfaction that stories promise. What actually happened was quieter and in some ways more satisfying. Gregory Whitfield excused himself from the circle a few minutes later, and I saw him on his phone near the windows, clearly making a call that had nothing to do with the party. I found out weeks afterward through a mutual contact that he'd spent that Monday morning in a very different kind of meeting than the one Rachel had expected, one about whether the board had been fully briefed on who exactly they'd hired, and whether there were other family businesses in his own professional orbit that could benefit from that same firm's attention. Rachel found me by the coat check as I was leaving about 20 minutes after everything unfolded. Her makeup had gone slightly the way it does when someone has been crying quietly in a bathroom trying to fix it before anyone notices. "I didn't know," she said, "about the Denver thing. I swear I didn't know it was you." "I believe you," I said, and I did. That was never really the point. She stopped, started again. "I've spent 10 years thinking I finally had something you didn't. And it turns out I've been working under you this whole time without even knowing it." "You're not working under me, Rachel. Meridian doesn't run Halstead Coal. We advised on a restructuring and stepped back. Your promotion is yours. You earned it. Then why does it feel like you just took something away from me?" I thought about that question for a long moment, because I think it deserved an honest answer, not a comforting one. Because for 10 years I said you needed me to be smaller than you, and tonight you found out I'm not. That's not me taking anything from you. That's just the truth finally showing up at the party. My mother didn't say much to me that night. She hugged me stiffly at the door, the kind of hug that's more performance than comfort, and said, "We should catch up more," in the tone people use when they have no intention of following through. But something did shift in the weeks that followed. The comments stopped, not overnight, and not with any apology attached, but they stopped. My mother started introducing me, when she introduced me at all, as my daughter who runs the consulting firm, which was a considerable upgrade from a decade of between things. Rachel and I talked twice more that month. Briefly, awkwardly, neither of us quite sure how to recalibrate a relationship built on 10 years of a story that had just been proven false in front of her boss and 40 of her coworkers. We're not close. I don't know if we ever will be, but there's something different in how she talks to me now, less performance, less comparison. Maybe that's its own kind of progress. Michael, when I told him a simplified version of what happened, not the specifics of Halstead Coal, just the fact that Aunt Rachel had said something unkind, and it hadn't gone the way she expected, just shrugged in the particular way 12-year-olds shrug at adult drama. "Grandma's always been kinda mean to you," he said, not looking up from his game. "I don't know why you go to those parties. Out of the mouths of children. Here's what I want you to take from this if you've stayed with me this long. It is entirely possible to build something extraordinary while people who claim to love you insist you've thrown your life away. The version of your life that other people can see, the title, the salary, the corner office, is rarely the whole story. Sometimes the real story is happening quietly at a kitchen table while a child sleeps upstairs and a spreadsheet slowly turns into a company." I didn't walk into that party looking for vindication. I walked in because my son loves his aunt, and because some tired, hopeful part of me still wanted to believe my family might finally see me clearly. They did in the end, just not in the way any of us expected. And if there's a lesson in that for you tonight, watching this story unfold from wherever you are, maybe it's this. The people who tell you that you've thrown your life away are usually the same people who never once asked what you were building instead. Don't wait for a party, a promotion, or a room full of strangers to prove them wrong. Just keep building. The truth has a way of showing up exactly when it's ready.